Hey everybody, I'm Sean Robinson.
I'm Carson Grubaugh. Welcome to Living the Line. Today we have a really special guest I'm really excited about. I got one of Gareth's books, The Dancing Plague, from Monogamic at Escape Pod Comics, and immediately went on a frenzy and bought, I think, pretty much everything else he's done and became a huge immediate fan. So very, very happy to have Gareth Brookes on the show today. Thanks for joining us, Gareth.
Thanks for having me.
So
Yeah.
Gareth, I hear that Carson missed a few of these primo secret
Not
items. Is that
really.
true?
No, like just kind of really early deep cuts, like from the mid to late noughties, like Sherlock Holmes versus Skeletor. That's one that you miss. You can get that on my website, just download for free. But yeah, just kind of like the first few years that I was doing comics, I was just doing really silly stuff like Stickman comics. I had this kind of Stickman character called Man, um, who's like a man who's got the powers of a man. So just like, but yeah, I didn't think I could draw at that point, but I kind of wanted to do comics, so I was just little Stickman comic doing stupid stuff, and it had characters like Shitting Ghost was one of the characters. That I remember, but yeah, you haven't seen those ones, but you're not missing that much.
Well, I'm definitely sad I'm missing out on the Sherlock Holmes ones. That sounds pretty great. I will be on the website tonight. So where are you piping in from today?
South London, near Croydon, a place called
Okay.
South Norwood, which is a good little neighbourhood. There's quite a few comics artists living around here now. It's kind of like as London's gentrified, we all seem to have moved like within, a couple of square miles of each other. So that's really good.
So when we started talking, you had up a Broyle painting as your background, and I was noticing the Plague book. Obviously, you've got some kind of art history background. So what is your actual sort of arts exposure background? Like, what's your background? Who are
Um,
you?
so I went to art school to kind of try and be a fine artist, and I I don't know, like I've just always liked comics and art and all sorts of different culture, all the artsy stuff. And I went to the Royal College of Art, which is got a good reputation. Did a master's degree there. It's got a good reputation as being one of the better ones, and that's kind of where I started drawing comics because I met a guy there called Steve Tillotson, who he we kind of like got back into comics because I read comics when I was a kid. Like if you're my age and you're British, you can't really like not have had comics when you were a kid. Growing up in the 80s, they were everywhere. It was just like part of the stuff that you had when you were a kid. But around the mid 90s, they seemed to like go up in price, and you had to buy about 20 issues of different Marvel comics to know what was happening in the story. So I kind of fell out of it. But when we were at the Royal College, me and Steve kind of got back into them, and we like discovered Dan Clowes and a few, like he was probably the main one we discovered, maybe Jeffrey Brown, maybe Seth. Like these books were kind of trickling over in like the early noughties. And like yeah, a few years after we graduated, we kind of finally came to the realization that the fine art careers weren't going to like take off, and we weren't going to be famous artists. So we kind of like, more him than me, he started going, yeah, we should do comics, we should do alternative comics like Dan Clowes. So we started a comic together called Banal Pig, and again, it was more him than me. It was a kind of funnies comic, lots of anthropomorphic animals. And yeah, we started going to like little comics fairs and things like that. But most of them were like quite, cosplay, loads of people dressed as Cybermen and stuff. But the more we went to them, the more we started meeting other kind of alternative comics people, and it's sort of like locked into a little scene that was kind of growing, and that's kind of how I got into it. But yeah, like I do come from that kind of I did a lot of art education. You know, I was in art school for about 7 years, so I've got all of that kind of art background to draw on as well.
Can you talk more about that scene as you see it? Because a lot of the people, like in the last year, when I've really been looking for, you know, I finally have a job where I can afford to like splurge on comics a little bit more, and I've been really looking around, and a lot, I think pretty much everyone that I've been super excited about and that we've wound up interviewing is from the UK. And it's like, what is that scene? What do you think's going on over there that's making it so potent?
It's weird because I think when I started, when we were going to those kind of events that everyone was, you know, in cosplay or whatever, there was nothing. Like there was like the whole British scene had exploded in like the 80s and the 70s, and there was loads of good comics. And then by kind of the late 90s, it seemed like it was completely dead, but I don't really know about it. And yeah, when I came in, there was no like any publishers, you know, seeing the like the Dan Clowes books and the Chris Ware books, and like, what's this? You know, like we've never seen anything like that really before. Maybe we knew about Crumb, someone like that, maybe, or like you know, the Freak Brothers or something like that. But you know, there wasn't anything like that in Britain, and we kind of like built, because there wasn't anything, we kind of had to sort of build it ourselves. So everyone kind of got together and made little zine fairs and little comics fairs and printed off the little comics and kind of got competitive in a good way and kind of all got better. I mean, there was people like, I don't know if you know Decadence comic.
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, so Lando from Decadence is one of my like table buddies. You know,
Okay.
we've been like tabling together for years and years, and you know, kind of always hook up and like have a
Sean,
drink
is that
together
he's
and
talking
stuff.
about that Stathis Cymberlitis that we looked at
Mhm.
with Matt Canning? Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So yeah, people like him, you know, we kind of just. I remember the first time I met him. He turned up like at this little zine fair, and he hadn't even folded or stapled his comic. He had like a long arm stapler, and he was just sitting there folding them all, going, "Oh, I'm really behind stapling." And I thought, this is really cool. This guy's awesome. Like other people like Isabel Greenberg. I don't know. She's kind of. I don't know if you know her, but
No.
she's done a few graphic novels. These were all people around at that time, but there was no publishers to be published by, and there wasn't really any big fairs. But like slowly they started happening. I think 2010. In 2010, two things happened that really made me like, you know, become more focused on comics. One was that there was publishers starting like Myriad Editions and Self-Made Hero, who were two publishers I've been published by, kind of started up around 2010, 2012, something like that. Other ones like No Brow, Jonathan Cape, you know, there started being British graphic novels and British comics like on the shelves in like bookstores and stuff. But the second thing that happened, which was probably more important, was that I went to Angoulême, and like I was like, it was such a mind-blowing experience. You know, it's only like just 20 miles of water between us and France, but it's such a different culture. You know, like in the UK, people don't really care about comics. They don't know much about them, and over there it's just like there's every sort of comic you can imagine. And like I saw that people making comics with textiles and making comics with paint and etching and all this fine art stuff that I'd done. And I went home and looked at the comics that I'd made. I was like, why am I using like pens and paper when like I've been to art school for all these years and I've done the embroidery and the lino cut and etching and all this stuff I know how to do. But as soon as I thought, oh, I'll draw comics, it's like I went and got some Bristol board and some fine liners and like started that way. So I mean, I don't know what I think the British scene. It's kind of like there's just like a hardcore of people that are my peers. I think that like just never had any expectations, that like really kind of were really involved in the DIY scene for years, and there was something special about that because a lot of us have been published. Like I mean, I went to like a little shop on the South Bank in London a few years ago now, probably about 3 or 4 years ago. and I looked at they had like a little shelf of graphic novels, and it was like that big. They only had about 30 titles, but half of them were by people that, you know, I'd been in, like I'd spent most of the late noughties in a room upstairs in a pub trying to sell little zines with, you know. So it's kind of, there's something special about that time, I think. But also I think like people, the publishing industry here doesn't know what sells, and it doesn't quite know what a successful graphic novel looks like. So they let you try things, you know. In France, they kind of know what's commercial. So they don't, you know, they've got a set idea of what they're going to promote and what they're going to publish. Here, they just don't really know. So they try, it seems like it's trying out more different things.
It seems like the UK scene might be more comparable to like the Italian scene, where you know, the Italian comics that were very popular were very genre specific, and everything else is sort of so far below the radar that they've been able to have all these sort of self-publishing and you know, cross-pollination with all these other different traditions. If you go to Italy, you know, you walk down the street and you can pick up like a Western that's done with super slick drawing and color. But then you go around the corner and there's a tiny little bookstore that's got like a government grant to be open, and they've got 300 books that they've published in the past 4 years, and they're all these little mimeographed weirdo publications with, you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that sounds good. I need to, like, I mean, the other thing about the UK scene, I think, is it's a bit, you know, myopic and a bit sort of inward focused. Like, I don't know much about Italian comic, and like when I went to Angoulême, it was like no one's really ever heard of it. And you can still talk to quite successful comic artists here that have never heard of Angoulême. So, you know, I think we're a bit inward focused as well. But I mean, there's so much good stuff now. Like, you know, since that kind of 2010, 2012, you know, initial sort of graphic novel publishers starting, you know, you've got Avery Hill Publishing and Breakdown Press, who are like publishing some really, really interesting stuff. And particularly they're kind of reprints of like weird manga from the 60s, 70s, 80s, I really love. And like the shop we've got here, Gosh Comics, you know, is really good. Tom Oldham there is really good at getting in, you know, it's American imports and imports from other countries. So it's always like an education to go there and like have a look on the, I mean, I remember that shop as well. Like, again, back in the day when I first went there to show them my comics, the shelf was that big, and now they've got like a huge wall just full of self-published stuff, and it's like a battle to get on there, you know. It's kind of so competitive. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you specifically about the, you know, you were saying that when you were in art school that you did stuff with, you know, traditional media and things like that. Why do you think that something like making like a lino cut or, you know, doing something on cardboard or doing something with, you know, sewing or whatever, what does it give a particular story that it wouldn't have given it if you had drawn it and executed it in a different medium?
I think it gives it, I mean, one of the things I took from art school, and I didn't take a lot, but one of the things I did take was that, you know, that every part of it, the form of it, the medium, it's all contributes to the message of the work, and it all contributes to the meaning. So like in my brain, if I have a story, it might sit there for years and it's just kind of waiting for a material or a process or some kind of approach that I can make materially in order to activate it. And as soon as those two things come together, like I'm off doing it, and it's going to get done. But for some reason, that's just the way my brain works. But I think like with kind of scanning technology, you know, it's introduced a kind of new photographic haptic possibility. You know, I feel like the kind of digital has gone off in two directions. On the one hand, you've got like the supposedly dematerialized kind of digital art that's like kind of, you know, digital. And then, but then you've also got the possibility to like photograph and scan in like real texture, and, you know, and that's a really interesting possibility. And it just, that tactility, that kind of it lends a kind of metaphorical weight to some of the work, I think, you know, to have the burnt texture on there in the Dancing Plague, or with Threadbare, to have that kind of people. I mean, I remember, was it Carson saying that you know, he wishes that he could feel the texture of it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, like I wished it was printed on like
Yeah.
or that you have all the originals bound in a book somewhere, and like I could feel it on canvas. That would be amazing.
So that, I mean, just that kind of lack, that desire, you know, is something that's kind of interesting to me, you know, that you know, the visual can't quite fulfill, you know, the kind of a fully embodied response to the work, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I think yeah, just the possibilities of scanning technology really interest me, and yeah, kind of the ways you can like import the real in inverted commas into the work.
You
So
know,
you've opened up like basically the three major things that I wanted to talk about with your work, or the three major questions I have. You kind of hinted at them. The first one is, you're talking about you have a story and then you're looking for a material to attach it to. I wanted to avoid the where do your ideas come from question, because your stories are like really like, where the hell, like this is such a good idea. But what's really fascinating is that they are always so material. And I wondered like which order that came in, if you had a process and that led to a story. It sounds like you always have the story first and then you attach it to a process.
No, sometimes I have the process first and it's waiting for a story. It could be the other way around. Yeah, so I mean, I think that was the way with the Thousand Colored Castles one, because I was kind of, I had this memory of being at school, and they, on kind of, you know, we have like fireworks night, which is to commemorate how Guy Fawkes nearly blew up the king, and that everyone has fireworks. So when we were little kids, they got us to like get the crayons and do like a big rainbow, and then get the black crayon and go all the way over the top so it was just black, and then they'd give us like little compasses, you know, for drawing circles, and you could scratch it away and make a little firework. And I just kind of woke up remembering that this had happened. And then I thought, I wonder like how cool that could be if I you know, tried it now. So I, you know, I did a few images, and then the story for A Thousand Colored Castle started coming about just from kind of, you know, that kind of story was suggested, that kind of suburban kind of quite you know, cozy but also dark story was suggested by how the, you know, those images looked after I'd made them.
So can you explain the process on that then? Because to me, it looked like you had like a painted blackboard and then we're working with like pastels or chalks or something on top. It
Yeah,
sounds like this is reductive. You're scratching away the
scratch
black.
board.
exactly. Yeah. So you just I mean, normal wax crayons, normal paper. You just do a drawing, and then you get a black crayon, and you just rub all the way over so that the whole thing's black, and your original drawing is underneath, and you can't really see it. And then you can get like a coin, or I usually use a knife of some kind and scratch it away, and the blacks kind of go in the gaps that is left by the crayon. So you can kind of leave little lines as well if you want to have a black line. And also it does something to it where the colors seem really lurid, and it kind of changes the colors of the crayon as well. I don't know quite what happens, but yeah, you kind of, and again, it was like the process of doing that kind of seemed like almost performatively appropriate to the story of like this woman who's losing her eyesight. And you know, it raises a question like how important it is that people know that, you know, this is what you've done. And I don't think it can be that important. I think it's nice if people know how I made it, but you kind of know that you can follow the story and it's fine. But it's more kind of, I don't know, it's as much for me as it is for, it's quite self-indulgent, but it's as much for me as anyone else. Just kind of like,
But
like making these images this way just feels right.
It adds a whole nother layer to my appreciation of the story, though, because of that, like, loss of vision and stuff, like having to scrape back through to get to the picture. That was another question I wanted. Well, I'll get to that eventually. The other thing I want to say about Materiality first is that I have been continue to be very surprised that you use stitchery so much, but you're always able to justify it in exactly the kind of conceptually tight, like conceptually hermetic way that you're talking about. It never seems just like, well, Gareth Brookes does stitchery stuff. There's always like a really good narrative reason for it. And I find that fascinating. And so I'm wondering, that medium in particular, like what it means to you that you're able to derive such, continually derive rich stories from it.
I think, I mean, I've known how to do embroidery since before I can even remember, really. My mum taught me, and she'd always kind of give me, she'd always be doing it, and she'd always give me little bits of thread and a little embroidery ring, and I would always do like boys stuff like tanks and wars and guns with it, But one thing I always felt about it was that the back always looks better than the front to me. It's kind of got this expressionistic kind of energy to it that the fronts kind of don't have. So to me, it's a really double-sided medium, and the page of a comic, you turn it, so a page is a double-sided thing. And I've always been fascinated by what can you see through a page, or what could read through a page. Like comics read from left to right, or right to left if it's a Japanese comic. But what about through? You can burn through, you can pierce through, you can scratch through a surface. So I've always been kind of wanting to break the surface of a comic and have stuff come out the other side. So for that reason, embroidery is a really good media for me, because it has that kind of like tangled chaos to it.
And you use that quite a bit in Threadbare, where you're scanning, I'm assuming it's the backside of most of the embroideries, and composing out of that. And then that gets to the another one of the questions, or like the big question I have for you. And you keep hinting at it in your answers here. There seems to be some desire, or like all of the stories in my mind, I tried to think like these are such a weird, disparate set of stories, each one individually, but like the more I thought, they seemed to have like this gravity at the middle of all of them that had to do with like connection to people, and how there's always like a barrier to connection. There's like an interface or a barrier, and the stories are about those barriers. And then like you keep talking about that too, like being on the other sides of things, and the stitchery seems to be about piercing that. Like, am I totally off base, or is that like a core concern of yours in relationships? And or what do you see as the core of what you're doing with your stories?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really thought of that, but I mean, that sounds like that could be right. Yeah, I mean, I think the Dancing Plague felt initially like I was going off on doing a kind of completely different thing, a bit like the Land of My Heart Chokes and Its Abundance. It was like almost me doing something completely different on purpose to kind of confound expectations or whatever. But I think you're right, actually. There's a kind of I think English society, particularly in the Southeast, is very, particularly kind of middle class, or upper class or upper middle class. It's so restrained, and no one ever talks about their feelings, and no one ever, there's a right way of doing things and a wrong way of doing things. And it's kind of, yeah, very frustrating. And there probably is that kind of, that's probably the core of, you know, that barrier that you can perceive in what I'm trying to do, is that kind of, that sort of very English distance between people, which seemed like it was breaking down, but more recently it's like there's a kind of romanticization of, even though like a lot of what a lot of Englishness and the stuff that English people done particularly is a failed project. It's like there's a lot of romanticization of it, doubling down and being like, no, let's do it exactly, let's give this one more try, sort of thing, you know. Or it's, I don't know. Yeah, so it is kind of, it is a critique on that, I suppose.
You, as far as the physical medium goes, just divorced from a second for any the thematic resonances that you're pulling out, it occurs to me that the sort of digitalness that you were talking about um, almost removes the performance quality of a piece of art.
Mm,
When you get the perception as a reader that this thing was created in a box, that it somehow can be divorced from the hand skill, the hand hewn skill, that your desire to work with physical materials and emphasize the physicality of those particular things makes the performance aspect of the art sort of underlined in a way, because someone's not making Photoshop filters for faking Luke's embroidery. uh,
yeah,
there's not a Photoshop, you see what I mean, like it's not like a brush pack that somebody's pulling off
yeah,
the
Yeah.
shelf to do this. And it seems like a lot of the work that sort of real strongly digital people are doing are trying to import these characteristics
mm,
into the box, and oh, it looks like a performance again. But the reader is aware on some level of the performance aspect having been removed or sort of leached out.
mm.
For better or for worse. I'm not saying it's one or the other, but I mean, I guess are you sort of aware of that quality? This is a very Italian style question I just asked you there. Here's a bunch of information.
No, I think like you're right. I mean, my students, you know, when I teach, they love Procreate, and the reason that they love Procreate is because you get to use a pen, and because you've got all these brushes and all these charcoals and that look like they're proper brushes and charcoals, and you can do these things that splash around like it's proper material, but you don't get your clothes dirty, and you can do it anyway. Um, but also at the same, and I quite like Procreate. You know, there is an embodied relationship between the movement of the pen and the digital. It's just not the same, and there's a materiality to it. It's not the same, and sometimes I think that work on Procreate, there is something about it, even when people are using completely different processes and styles, that make it look similar, or there's an atmosphere to it. It's just like, yeah, I can tell this has been done on Procreate. But I think that like it's weird. I think the whole, like, to get really philosophical about it, I think the whole project of digitalization is kind of, there's a kind of mysticalness about it, you know, and this kind of like original Western thought era of like removing the mind from the body, and like we can have these perfect minds, brains living in the cloud, and everything can be sort of disembodied. But the way that we relate to art and each other is embodied, so it's not going to work. It's kind of like, you know, you kind of, you know, you get to the point where people are presenting NFTs or whatever as art, and some of them are really just not, they're not doing anything because there's no embodied relationship between you and the work of art. And in fact, they have to like invent this new sort of authenticity to, so that it's theoretically authentic, you know. But I don't know. I think, I mean, having said all this, you know, I couldn't do what I do without Photoshop, you know, and there's a real element of inauthenticity and kind of what's the word, you know, it's lying, you know. I'm kind of like scanning stuff in and then like doing a lot of Photoshop work to arrange it all and to get it to look like a comic. So it's kind. I mean, I think in all art there's that element of kind of misleading the viewer and artifice and whatever. But it's kind of I find it really fascinating that the technology can go in another direction and it gives you more possibilities to do stuff with craft, you know, to do stuff with ancient, you know, art forms like embroidery, and like I can like scan it in and make an image and then put it on Instagram and it can be all over the place. You know, that's kind of interesting and almost kind of in the tradition of certain textile production, maybe. I don't know. But you know, it's kind of that relationship to the digital. I want it to be, for there still to be like an embodied something there, for there still to, for it to relate not just to the visual but also to touch, even if it's only in the imagination.
So that was the third or fourth. I don't know. I got lost in my own questions, but you start talking about digitalization. One of the biggest curiosities, and I think it was most present for me in the Dancing Plague, was if this was all actually done. Like, here's a piece of canvas I sewed and I burned. Like, it seemed to me like the burning had to have been done on something else and then digitized on top. Like the canvas would light on fire, or
No, no, it doesn't. No, it kind of, that's what I thought, but then I did it, and it doesn't. You can't, like, sometimes you can burn through the. I mean, you know, I did it. I did it all on like a baking tray, like on calico, which is basically cotton, and yeah, you can leave it lying there and it doesn't catch fire or anything. I don't know why.
So it's not like you burnt these on wood, scanned them, and put the canvas in the back. These are actually burnt
No.
onto the canvas.
Yeah, I wish I had a few lying around, but they're all in my studio. But yeah, like they're all yeah. So a piece of calico, you
Okay.
you can just burn it on there with, it's basically like a soldering iron or a pyrography tool, and they come with like all these fancy attachments that are like flowers and hearts and stuff. But there's only two really good ones. There's like the pointy one for doing lines, and then there's like a flat chisel one.
Yeah, and you can get an angled chisel one sometimes.
Yeah,
Like
that's
that.
the one that I used. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
gotcha.
like if you just kind of like, you know, do slow kind of circles with that, then you can produce tone, and you can turn up and down the you know, the heat on it, but also the singed edges as well. I did that with a candle because it wouldn't burn. So I had to, like, in certain parts of it, like when the demons were falling out of the sky and the angels were falling out of the sky, I got my lovely embroidery that I'd spent ages on and just held it over a candle and like burnt certain bits of it. And sometimes I went a bit too far and the whole thing fell apart. But most of the time, it was actually okay to control.
And then the panel borders as well, because those were really the things that to me look like, this must be burnt paper that's been scanned in, or.
I just singed the edges of the calico.
Wow. Okay. So this is way more physical even than I thought. It's like way more physically present.
Yeah, I mean, all my work, I will make, like, you know, it's really just collage together. Like the only tools I really use on Photoshop are like the ones that cut things out and the ones that stick things to. So it's collage basically. But yeah, I mean, I've got a huge pile in my studio of burnt bits of calico.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised, you know, given that you're talking about at the beginning process of having the friction between these story ideas and these ideas for platform, and kind of watching these things sort of grow together. I mean, responsive art making involves the kind of things that you're talking about. I mean, you don't get that same kind of, if you don't have that tactile feedback of this object will do this when I'm doing that, you know. I guess what I'm saying is your story building technique seems of a piece with your desire to work with real world materials, because you get that same kind of responsive friction and possibilities from working. You know, painting on a blank canvas is completely different than painting on a piece of cardboard,
Mm.
and drawing on a material that falls apart as you're working on it is different than drawing on a machine produced piece of paper that is, you know, slick and everything else.
Yeah, Yeah, that's absolutely right. And also kind of just that feeling of being out of control. You know, that's why I don't really, you know, I couldn't really like be a proper cartoonist and use a big, you know, um, graphic tablet and, you know exactly what something's going to look like. It has to be like a struggle, and it has to be kind of, and I don't even really plan the story out properly or thumbnail it either. I'm just kind of like every week I can do 2 or 3 pages, and that's me in the studio struggling with the materials and then thinking about the next thing that's going to happen, that's going to fit this kind of rough idea that I've got of how the story's going to work. So yeah, it is like that's quite insightful. I do that. I'm just kind of, it has to be, you know, I have to have resistance at all times.
And it seems like in that resistance, you find the look of the style for each book too, which is something else I found fascinating. Like you're really drawing like in a medieval style in the Dancing Plague. In Can I Borrow Your Toilet, it's much more like photorealist type of cross hatching. So is that
Yeah.
like, do you go into it or do you have to do test pieces to find the style first, or does it just, the material demands it automatically?
Um, I don't know. I think I mean, there's probably about a month or two where I'm getting into it, where I'm figuring out what the materials are going to do, and I'm kind of working out what style it's going to be. The 1,000 Colored Castles took a lot longer because it took me ages to get a really clear image using that process. And what happened was 2 years after I started, I looked at the first pages and they were awful. And I was like, I could do so much better now. So I went back and did a bunch of the,
Mhm.
the first pages again. But then I thought if I could keep doing this forever. So I kind of stopped. I like picked 10 pages that didn't look good to me and just redid those ones. Um,
That
so,
was the limit.
yeah. And you know what? I wish I'd kind of, because the first pages were really dark and like they looked a bit murky, and I wish I'd kind of started at the end and done those. So the last page was the first page I ever did, and then worked to the front. So at the beginning it would be beautiful and clear, and like
Mm,
um, it would look like I really knew what I was doing, and then by the end it'd be like some murky, dark looking shapes. But
yeah.
yeah, I don't know, kind of.
That's another one of those, like, conceptually that totally makes sense with the story. Is that I'm curious too about like how you got to this, you call it a thought experiment, a self-indulgent thought experiment that is the afterwards.
Mm.
Was there something in like going back and trying to do the story over that led to that kind of reconsideration of your own work?
I think, I mean, two things really. First, I always feel like I'm making work for that scene that I was talking about at the beginning, the kind of late noughties little um, comic self-publishing scene that we had before there was any publishers. I feel like that's the real wellspring of creativity. So between graphic novels, I always like to go back and do self-published books. um, whether I'm going to actually go and sell them at the zine fair. Most of the time I sell books online now, but I like to go. I like to go to the zine fairs and try and sell a couple. So that's the first thing. It's like, and it doesn't feel as pressurized. It feels like this is my thing again. So I
Mhm.
don't necessarily have like, I'm not overthinking it, so I can do something really silly and ridiculous, and these are my stories, and I can imagine what's happening to these characters in the future. I think the second thing was the 1,000 Colored Castles was, I was doing it in the lead up around the kind of Brexit, Trump getting elected, this kind of whole, it felt like everybody had gone a bit mad with social networking. No one knew it was true anymore. Like maybe now we're just starting to figure it all out, but it was kind of, everybody was like living in their own reality, and I felt like 1,000 Colored Castles is a bit like that, but I wanted to do something that like pushed it further, and like you know, like Black Mirror episodes, something like that. I just wanted to do something that kind of like talked a bit about whatever future we're trying to head towards, and that it be satirical, and maybe a comment about the times that I made those two books.
Well, that's what I appreciated so much about them, is that the two original stories are kind of so small and personal and heartfelt, and then you flip them into, yeah, like two Black Mirror episodes
Yeah,
that completely like invert the original books. Like they invert the perversion, and they invert the problem of the barrier of reality in such compelling ways. And again, it's kind of like when you did, like, man, this guy came up with like 4 different reasons to use thread. He came up with like 2 really compelling inversions of his own work. And that kind of constant clever surprise to me is just so compelling.
I mean, I think that's what technology does. It completely inverts things. You know, sometimes I think about if something new comes out, like say TikTok or something, and I'm thinking, shall I join this? And I like imagine myself when I was 18, and I kind of explained to myself, you know, what this is, and I imagine what my 18-year-old self would say, because I feel quite lucky really, because I didn't really use the internet every day till I was probably in my mid-20s. So unlike a lot of people, I can remember what it was like before. And something like Spotify, you know, it's like, oh, my 18-year-old self would be like, oh wow, you know, you can get any music ever. And I'm like, yeah, but a lot of it sucks now, and there's no one really gets a second or third album unless you give them this money. There's adverts and things like that. So, you know, music does invert things. It's like kind of, you know, I mean, yeah.
Not not to harp on that, you know, that too much, but I mean, as far as the embodiment stuff goes, I mean, digital music is a, as far as the technologies that have gotten subsumed by digital, music is always on the forefront because it's cheaper processing wise to process audio than it is to process images, than it is to process video. And so you have this sort of hierarchy. In music, we've already gone through the toilet. You know, we've already been flushed and we're all down in the sewer, where nothing is a performance. There is no embodiment of it. Even a live performance is not a performance in the way that we're talking about it. The only way you get a live performance by a musician is if they are unamplified on a street corner near you, and you're actually experiencing it in real time without any type of amplification or any type of anything else. So much so that somebody who's grown up in this era doesn't have an actual engagement with the mentality of someone played that. That thing played by so and so. You know, you can go through and read the, you know, even though you know, obviously editing and things like that were present in earlier eras. It wasn't so much so that the performance existed independent of the artist. But I think that's truly where we are right now. And now, you know, it seems like that's really just the vanguard for, you know, what's coming. And it's just interesting that you can sort of litter your work with these like sort of hallmarks of hand-hewn authenticity. And you know, if Gareth, if one of your books takes off, you can bet somebody's going to have a filter. You know, the Gareth cardboard overlay, the Procreate filter that's going to make it look like you've drawn this directly with magic marker on cardboard.
Yeah, but it will look a bit uncanny and not quite right, you know.
Right, until a generation has gone by and people have forgotten what cardboard is, in which case the uncanny will have subsumed the original.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, I mean, the other thing that's been a constant thing throughout, you know, me doing comics is people telling me that digital comics are gonna take over, you know. And like, I remember like when doing the little zine fairs that I was talking about at the beginning, like we did them, like there was a very cool magazine turned up one time and did an interview with us all, and then they published an article about us that said, that kind of cast us in the role of Luddites, you know, the last stand of print, you know, like they're doing it even though they've we've got MySpace now and blogs and things like that. And like there's people that said, you know, smart people that everyone listened to that said, you know, I remember one guy saying to me, if you in the year 2020, or it might have even been 2015, if you show a kid a book, they won't even know what it is, like a cassette tape, you know. And like that hasn't happened. And like if anything, the opposite's happened, the kind of production values. I mean, like when I get a graphic novel or a comic, like anything, I really like, that's luxury time to me, you know. I'll wait until the conditions are perfect, and then like I'll get rid of all my tech, and then that's like a real tactile, you know, moment. And I think that's true for a lot of people that read comics. And also you can see it in book publishing as well, like how they've taken on a lot of these kind of tactile, different forms and production values in kind of prose novels. So it's kind of like, happily the kind of opposites happen. I mean, we all read like stuff digitally, like I do now, even me, since the pandemic. But you know, that I think that print will definitely survive, despite what I've been told all these
Well, and
years.
I think that's where I was like with something like Threadbare, like I wanted it on canvas so bad because I'm always fascinated by printing projects that I think the move to digital just forced the print industry to justify the object a little bit more. And I really love work like yours where the justification is part of the story and part of the meaning. And I think that's the extra, like, oh, I just want to like feel it too, because then you're like, yeah, you could scan this and have this digitally, but you'll never be able to feel it, you asshole. And but like you're saying that depriving me of that is kind of part of what you get a kick out of.
Maybe, yeah. I think it's not that I get a kick out of it. It's just like it is more, I mean, it's more real than looking at it digitally, because that you've got the turn of the page, so you can kind of see what's on the other side. There is, you know, you are touching it. There is a tactility there.
Yeah, and that turned is really important in Threadbare.
Yeah.
So, but I think
mean,
there is some longing that you're generating that adds to this sense that I got of like this desire to communicate, or like home being on the little napkins and bleeding through.
I mean,
It's
it's like
such a desire to touch that, and the whole thing is like a desire to see these old memories, it seems like. So you're generating that in a really fascinating way.
It's like we've all touched textiles, and we've all touched paper hand towels, and we've all touched these things. So it's kind of appealing to our own experience in the same way that, you know, like the soundtrack of a comic does, when you have like the blam or crash, or you see a car crash, and you know, like there's a soundtrack that's appealing to our memory of hearing and sound. This is the same thing, it's just with tactility.
That's interesting. It's like a closure experience with the tactility. Dude, you just blew my mind.
that I think it's people, for those of us who think that this is an important experience, it's maybe part of our duty to help make the physical object as part of that experience and as nice as possible. You know, one of the reasons that print quality matters is when you get something that's really, really well produced, you know, you're seeing it in a way that's different, fundamentally different than having a bunch of light fired directly into your face by a screen or whatever. I remember having this experience the first time that I saw printing on canvas, and it was these terrible, you know, hotel style, you know, the painting with a trowel. Somebody's got three colors and they paint with a trowel. But I remember thinking, well, man, all they have to do now is be able to take images of the raising and lowering of the surface of each of these things, and we could all have, you know, a Leonardo in our house, or we could have a Van Gogh, or whatever it is that, you know, I was thinking at the time. Because, you know, you imagine like that's the dream, right? Is that the object itself, with all of its, you know, eccentricities, has come into your your care, and you've got the thing itself, in the same way that like you want to possess something that you admire. uh it's like the good reproduction of the surface gives you like the illusion of possession.
Mm.
um I've really gotten us off track here, I apologize.
It's kind of, it's the digital again that allows you to do that, and the kind of how cheap everything's got. I remember the first comics I made, like no one printed color. Like a lot of people are still using photocopies and stuff. And also risograph was actually cheap in those days, and it was a kind of really sort of cheap option. But no one printed color because you couldn't afford it, and no one printed on nice paper. Everyone like stayed after work and used the work photocopy or the work printer. But it's so the cheapness of the printing technology is something that's put that power in my hands and in the hands of people. I mean, I think like the tactility is really important, but on the other hand, I wouldn't want to use the finest materials and make it all about that, because then it would become really expensive. And I love that comics are an affordable art form, even though a lot of graphic novels are a bit pricey, kind of out of my price range sometimes. They're still like more accessible than high art and things like that. Yeah.
And something I was actually really impressed with, because a lot of what me and Sean talk about is reproduction, because Sean's like a reproduction guru. We've done videos on scanner focal depth, and I was actually thinking about that when I was looking at your work, that you have this three-dimensional quality, or like the buckled paper and things like that. And we had done a test where we had scanned like crumpled dollar bills, and I was looking at your book with the crumpled paper and looking at the books with the stitchery, and I was thinking, man, this guy must have so you must have gone out of your way to get a really good scanner to make all this work.
Not really. I mean, my scanner's just like from the kind of ordinary. It's really like, my scanner is actually really horrible. I've had it for years. I've dropped it so often. It's got like little flecks of wax crayon from when I did the 1,000 Color Castles actually inside it. I don't know how they got in there, but like I've had to really clean it after that. And I don't think it's a particularly great scanner. I put books on top to try and flatten it down, but
Classic.
I don't know. I kind of thought all scanners were the same, so I don't know. Maybe I have like randomly got a really.
What kind is it, Sean? We're gonna have to run a test on this, because this stuff looks good.
It's a Canon CanoScan LID 220 apparently, and I've probably had it for. I think I got it in like 2007 maybe.
Okay.
We got to run a focal depth test on this thing, because these are badass. Like he's got like all of this built up, but every little one of these is perfect still. So it's got some kind of focal depth.
Well, that might be deception again, because like what I'll do is I'm gonna give away all my secrets. But
okay,
so
well, this is what we're interested in.
And I'll scan in the background and then kind of cut it out on Photoshop. And because otherwise it's going to have like a lot of wrinkles, and the wrinkles from the ring all around it as well. So there's a lot of cutting out and just drawing around it with an eraser and trying to smooth it over so it looks all right involved.
Well, there you go, Carson. There's your answer.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's that kind of like nerdy technical detail is part of the things that fascinate us so much, especially with such unique productions like this. So
there's a particular the particular scanner that I'm always advocating for if somebody has money for it. I mean, one of the reasons that particular one became the leading like Epson one is because they made it so that the depth is fairly wide, so you can scan a physical object and have a certain amount of sharpness and fidelity as it raises away from but
which one's that then? Maybe I should get that.
Oh, it's the Epson XP series. So XP sorry, Epson 10,000 XL.
Okay.
11,000 XL, 12,000 XL. They're all the same, but it's got a wide focal depth. So yeah, you can scan paintings in raised surfaces and things like that. But
that would probably save me a lot of time. Like you can see, if you look at some of the Black Project pages where I haven't done that, you can see that it goes out of focus a little bit on certain pages.
Gotcha.
So yeah, well, maybe I'll get one.
You get some have some fun, picking up felt and finding coins and stuff like that. Like that's the stuff that to me really unlocks the strength of digital, is the ability to use anything as your sort of playpen. And once again, the music analogy, when sampling was first possible, you had people like Kate Bush and XTC and Tears for Fears and stuff are like, well, what if I made a song where the drums are just a person screaming over and over again? And then you have people who are like, oh, I can get the perfect sound. I never have to hire anyone else. I just have, it's like two different approaches to one is sort of the palette of the unknown, and then one is sort of like, how can I perfect the thing that these people want? Which is definitely two different things.
The palette of the overknown.
Right, exactly.
and you're talking about 3D, like, oh, if we could print a Van Gogh. They've done that with the Rembrandt. They like made I think it was an AI like painted a Rembrandt just based on scans of other Rembrandts, but it also had a depth map, and then they 3D printed it and then like sprayed the color on top of it. The only thing that they're missing is the layers of glaze and stuff, but they'll get to that where they can control the transparency of the material too. And then with this new Wall-E AI, or
then we can all finally relax.
Yeah. Have you seen that, Gareth? Have you seen the Dolly 2
No,
AI?
I've never seen that.
It's frightening. It's a AI that's producing like, I mean, really, really good aesthetic material. Like all you got to do is type in like, I don't know, dolphin floating in outer space, and it will put on a spacesuit and it can render it in whatever style.
Okay, so it does whatever you want.
Yeah, just based on a text prompt, it will generate any image. It's a lot of artists are freaking out because it's like, well, we're unnecessary now. And then other people are like leaning into it and saying, okay, well, this is just another tool. Like it's about the prompts. And
I think, I mean, I think it'd be cool if everyone could have a Rembrandt in their house, but something tells me that people would still go and see the Rembrandt, in the gallery. Even if they could have the exact same copy in their house. And as for this Wall-E thing, I don't know, like it's about what you tell it to do, isn't it? Not what it can do. It's like, yeah, I mean, once you've told it to do a dolphin with a space suit on, what's next?
Well, I think the next step was it generates its own text and then uses that to make images.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Oh, maybe we are at the job then. Things have,
Well,
the hour is later than I thought. Things have moved on.
If you can make a Rembrandt that has depth to it and has all these different things, at a certain point you have to think that the only thing left is the fetishization of the history of that particular object. But I like to think that, I mean, maybe I'm just totally off base, but I mean, I like to think that we shouldn't despair yet, that uncanniness will become more apparent over time. And that when people are exposed to something that has a sort of authentic character to it, that maybe those things that make it that way are less easily imitable and than the things that are clean,
I think for me as well, the digital experience, the thing it can't give you is that when you go to a gallery to see a Rembrandt, you, over the other side of the gallery, you see something you've never heard of or seen before that's amazing, that isn't necessarily that popular, and you're like, wow, this is, you see Louise Bourgeois or something like that, you're like, oh wow. And that's, the algorithms don't really give you that yet. I think they tend to just tell you to keep consuming exactly the same thing that you've already just had.
Well,
as if
yeah, I mean, that's exactly how I came across your work. I just sent $100 to a comic shop and said, surprise me, and they sent me 4 books, and one of them was The Dancing Plague, and it was like, yeah, the algorithm would have never suggested that to me. So I intentionally do stuff like that to break that algorithm. And it goes back to a little bit to, you were talking about the conversation you have with like your 18-year-old self. And that really struck with me because I know my 18-year-old self was very interested in being the disembodied ego in the cloud that you were talking about. And as I've got older, like that scares the hell out of me now because I've seen where technology's going and stuff. And yeah, there's just things that when you admit to yourself that you are your body and you are in an embodied experience, there's things that you're just missing out on. And that seems quite profound to me.
I think, you know, someone said to me once about the kind of technology thing. Imagine if the telephone had been invented after email. Like everyone would be going, "This is incredible!" Like using it all the time for everything. I can get so much work done in 5 minutes. I can, you know. It's just like there's this kind of myth of progress that like art reflects the progress of society and technology reflects the progress of society, and it's all kind of going somewhere, but it's not. It's just kind of
Novelty.
yeah.
Novelty and random chance of development. Yeah, it's a miracle. I mean, the technology that it took to make the phone work, especially international connections and things like that. I mean, it was absolutely stunning. And the only reason it happened is because someone saw financial incentive and they plowed money into that furrow until it was dug nice and deep. Right? They were decades ahead of many other industries. You know, from a pure technological standpoint. And it's just, you're right. It's random chance. Yeah, man, does that beat having to write everything out? Having worked with somebody who only wants things written out for, you know, worked with them for 8 years.
Oh
It
yeah.
sure does beat being able to just call Carson on the phone and be like, "Hey, dude, that thing, that's okay? Okay. Yeah, okay."
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I hadn't thought about that. We've spent a long time just faxing back and forth with the gentleman because that's the only way to communicate. But hopefully after this conversation talking about dumping some money, hopefully people will be curious about
Yes.
your work now, and we'll start going and dumping money into Gareth's projects. He's got a ton of them: 1,000 Colored Castles, Home, the Black Project. I just got to show off here. Threadbare, Afterward, which is a follow-up to 1,000 Colored Castles and the Black Project. Can I borrow your toilet? This is an old cut.
That's a very old one.
The Dancing Plague. And then this is the one that you said was most. Can you say the title of this one? I know it's really.
The land of my heart chokes on its abundance.
Yeah, I knew I was going to forget that. And this is his most tactile book here. It's got really nice paper. So
yeah,
that's
that one takes ages to make, like because it's original. I draw out the monoprint on the front of the back on the back for every single one, like 3 color, and then I've got to drill
Lord.
the holes with my little Japanese hand paper drill, and then I've got to bind it.
Yeah.
It's such a bad, an ill-conceived thing, but
But
yeah,
it's a really beautiful object, and all this stuff is still available on your website, which will here's the hand binding on the inside.
And
yeah.
I think most of our viewers are in the U.S. So what's the distribution like in the U.S.? Carson, would you say Menachem is the way to go? Escape Pod Comics?
I don't. I mean, I don't really know how it works. Like the Dancing Plague is available. You know, it's distributed
Okay.
in the States, and 1,000 Color Castles is as well. That's available with Penn State Press. But all the other ones I have to send over, which I'm very happy to do.
Right.
It just might take a few weeks, and it might arrive in more than one package.
Yeah. I'm
Things
glad
like
you
that.
warned me about that too, because I got like a small package and I was like, where did oh yeah, he told me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
if you
probably
order everything, yeah, I need to send it in 2 packages sometime, and one might arrive a few weeks after the other. But you know, I've never like had someone go they didn't arrive, so it's pretty good.
Yeah, Menachem got me the Dancing Plague. I'm sure he could get some of them, but he's probably paying international shipping fees that you'll pay as well. So Monachum can definitely get people the Dancing Plague from Escape Pod Comics. He'd probably, if there's a US edition, you said, of 1,000 Colored Castles from someone other than Myriad, he'd probably be able to get that. But I got the rest of them. I just went to Gareth's website and ordered them all on there, which highly recommend the experience.
We hope that you will do so right now. And Carson, what else can they pick up?
Oh, if that's not enough for them, they should definitely go get themselves a copy of The Strange Death of Alex Raymond if you want to talk about moving physical to digital back to physical.
That's an interesting book, actually. I need to get hold of a copy of that, because didn't he try and he studied all the styles of all these old, I mean, you guys publish it, so all this, but it's like
Carson, Carson, co-artist on there. Yeah, he studied that. Dave studied all of those artists and tried to draw imitate them as best as he can. So
okay, right.
It's,
because it's like inhabiting someone else's like subjective style is a really interesting kind of idea. How you can do that. So,
and then I got the extra bizarre task of like trying to inhabit Dave, inhabiting Alex Raymond, inhabiting Al Williamson. It was like I came on after Dave couldn't draw anymore, and he would be like, imitate Al Williamson. It's like, yeah, but when you imitate Al Williamson, it doesn't look like Al Williamson, and people want what you're doing, so I've got to try and imitate that, which I didn't do very well either. But it's a very I don't know, I like the process of imitate. You do that too. You do stylistic imitation quite purposefully, it seems like.
That's next level. I didn't realize there was so much of that kind of stuff went into that book. I'm gonna have to investigate. That's next level intersubjective kind of experimentation.
From a personal level, I wouldn't recommend it. It's dangerous for your psyche.
Yeah, Carson and I both got infected by Glamour Puss, which was Dave's comic that he was making, where that was explicitly what he set out to do. I'm gonna enjoy my retirement by drawing subjects I want to draw, which is pretty girls and classic comics. And I'm going to do it in the style of all these people. And when I first read Glamour Puss, I mean, it was super inspiring in the sense of like, I want to try making art like somebody else and see what that does. I was working as a high school teacher at the time, and you get that experience as a teacher where you're looking at somebody else's drawing and they're asking you for advice, and part of the advice is, sure, like, how would I solve this problem? But part of the advice a lot of times is like, how would I solve the problem and make it look like your thing still? Like, how can I get you to get to the problem solution within your own style? It's not really that dissimilar than trying to draw like somebody else. It's an interesting thing. But yeah, it's a like a squeegee on your brain, right, Carson? It's like,
well, maybe because we do all teach, maybe I hadn't connected it to that. Honestly, I should have, but it is like that, looking at a student's art. And Gareth, you teach too, so maybe that's part of where we all get that from.
Yeah,
it's a strange thing.
Well, lots of stuff for you guys to pick up. And Gareth, thank you for taking the time out to talk to us, and I'm really excited to see what you do next, and kind of like hoping that we can keep the channel of communication open, and keep talking about what it is that you're doing, because I really have been blown away by the stuff of yours that I've seen, and excited about getting Carson. I'm going to have to pick your brain about which books to acquire. Order. So
yeah, I got the list for sure.
Excellent. All right.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gareth. Right. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been awesome.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.